everybody. I have a bit of a New Year's treat for you all. I have here the main headlines and astrology for 2023. So, I'm going to be talking about the big transits that are going on, the big shifts in energy, and we have a lot of them for 2023. So, I'm really hoping that this year turns out to be a lot better than the past couple of years. I think we're all hoping for that for sure. But there is some pretty big shifts in the energy that's happening, and I want to go through them all. So this is the general big headlines. It's not the specifics. If you want the specifics, like if you want something that's even more detailed, I do have a newsletter that I'm putting out at the beginning of each month, giving you the headlines for the month. And if you want even more specific with what's going on each week, I do have on my Patreon that. So that's an aside, just in case you want something more specific. This is just the big general overview of like how the energy is shifting for the year, which, I hope will be helpful for you, and I hope will help you to kind of like see what the energies are ahead, and maybe like help you plan things out a little bit. So let's get started. I have made some notes here. I've got my little notes with dates and everything. The biggest headline that we have this year is that Pluto is changing signs. So why this is a big deal is because Pluto is the slowest moving planet in our solar system, and it changes signs anywhere from every 14 to every 20 years. So it really talks to us about the era that we're in. It is a huge shift. And it is one that I think is, going to be probably the most important shift for us for the coming year. So Pluto's going into Aquarius. He's been in Capricorn since 2008. So that is like 15 years that he's been in that sign. And if you remember what happened in 2008, we had the banking crash, we had the start of the housing crisis. When Pluto changes signs, it often causes like a disruption of some kind. Now, Pluto, when it comes to astrology, he represents power, he represents death, and he represents like the psychological underbelly of things. Now, Pluto changes things, but he doesn't change things in these all at once crazy event fashion the way that Uranus does. Uranus is about chaos and change, like quick, sudden changes. Pluto's more about slow, steady change over time. He moves very slowly. Think of him like, it's like the death card, right? Like it's transition. It is letting old things die, things that don't work for us anymore so that we can bring new things in. Pluto also tends to turn over the things that are hidden. It tends to reveal the scandals, the things that have been going on behind the scenes that, maybe aren't so good. He tends to do those kinds of things. And Pluto really talks to us about power structure and where power is shifting. So Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008, and Capricorn is a sign that's very much about structures. It's about government, big business, banking, and we've seen obviously with the banking and the financial crisis and the housing crisis that some of these structures aren't working so well, and they collapsed, especially at the beginning of Pluto going into Capricorn. There's also been in Pluto in Capricorn, because it's about government, there's been around the world a lot of a rise in like fascism, a rise in power towards like those in charge. There's been real movement towards that, and it's really exposed some of the dark underbelly of things like how the banking structure is set up. It's also shown us like corruption in government. When Pluto was in Scorpio, just to give you an example, that was about 1980, I think, to about 1994, 95. There was Scorpio's all about sex. And so that was when the AIDS epidemic happened. It exposed a lot of the underbelly in that. When Pluto was in Sagittarius from about 95 to 2008, we saw religious structures. There was the whole Catholic Church sex abuse scandal that came out. So Pluto tends to like show us where, things haven't been going so well behind the scenes. So Pluto's now shifting into Aquarius. He's only going to shift into Aquarius for a little bit this year. This is going to be from March 23rd to June 11th. So what happens is he moves very slowly and spends about half the year in retrograde. So he's going out of Capricorn into Aquarius. He stops turns around and retrogrades back into Capricorn for a little bit, and then he goes back into Aquarius permanently, for the next 20 years on January 21st, 2024. And he's going to be in Aquarius until 2043. So between March and June this year, March 23rd to June 11th, we get a little snapshot of some of the themes that we're going to see emerging from 2024 to 2043. So it's going to show us like some things that we're going to be dealing with for the next 20 years, which is like a big deal. So when Pluto is in Aquarius, the last time Pluto was in Aquarius was from 1778 to 1798. Pluto takes about 248 years to go all the way around the zodiac. He moves quite slowly. So with that, you think back to what happened historically during that period, because Pluto tends to change like world events. Like it's an outer planet, it's very slow moving. It can change things in your personal life, and we'll get into that in a second. But generally, it's good to look at overall what happens like historically. So from 1778 to 1798, that 20-year period saw revolutions. We had the end of the American Revolution and the beginning of, the modern state of the United States, the beginning of that. There was also the French Revolution during this period. There was the Haitian Revolution. It was really a time where people were thinking differently about what power structures look like for people, because Aquarius represents the community. It doesn't represent the government the way that Capricorn does. It represents the community. And so I'm hoping that this is a shift of power towards a more community, more democratic, more power to the people. But we will see, right? Because it's also about revolutions as well, which can be good or not good depending what happens. Like you think about the French Revolution and, it became the terror, it depends where you are, who you are, all of those kind of things. Revolutions are not always like nice, peaceful things. They're revolutions, right? So we could see some of those things potentially, but we could also see a shift towards more democratization of things, or towards power shifting towards the collective. And again, this can be good and bad. This can be good because, obviously we don't want power in the hands of the very few, but it could also be the tyranny of the masses, right? Over, people that maybe don't have as much power. So it'd be interesting to kind of see where that goes. The other thing is Aquarius is a sign that's not just about community, it's also about technology. And when you think of what happened in the late 1700s, we have the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, which changed society on quite a large level. People moved more from the country into the cities. We got, the work week. Like it really changed a lot of things when it comes to how society is arranged. And we might see that again where technology ends up changing the way that we structure society. And people have been talking a lot about, AI and things like that. AI, social media, the internet. How is technology going to change our society? And it'll probably change it in quite profound ways over the next 20 years. And hopefully this is for the better and not for the worse. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. And, we do have in this late 1700s as well, things like, we have the start of the Industrial Revolution and steam power and all this, which did change the way transportation worked. People were able to, trains became like a big thing as we get into, the 1800s and how people move around. But that beginning of that really started in the late 1700s with, steam power and the Industrial Revolution. Also air travel. Obviously, planes weren't invented till later, but the hot air balloon was used during the Napoleonic Wars to as reconnaissance, to be able to kind of like the way we use drones now, to be able to look out over the battlefield and see what was going on. So that was a big technological advancement. And so we might see changes in things like air travel because Aquarius is an air sign. So we might see things like that over the next 20 years. So it'd be really interesting to see how this develops, what the technology is going to be, what's going to come up with that. Interestingly, though, Pluto also, like I said, kind of turns over, the rocks and exposes all the little bugs walking around and all the things that we don't want to see. Are we going to see some of the seedy underbelly of how technology has been used to manipulate people? That's a theme that might come up as well over the next 20 years. So I'll be really curious to see what happens between March 23rd and June 11th news wise, as far as these things like technology, society, power structures, to see what comes up, because it'll give us some clues as to what's going to happen, I think, over the next 20 years. Now, if you know your birth chart, and not everybody does, this is a little bit more advanced. If you know your birth chart, look at the house that is Aquarius for your birth chart, because that's going to show you where changes are going to happen over the next 20 years or so. So if you don't know your birth chart, that's okay. Aquarius tends to rule things like community, friendships. It tends to rule things like technology. So you may see some changes in those areas of your life, but also just watch yourself what kind of happens between March 23rd and June 11th, as far as like maybe certain things ending, because Pluto's about death. I don't mean anyone's going to die, so not saying that. But look at some of the things where, maybe something doesn't work for you anymore. You're letting go of something. Look where power dynamics change during that period, because that's going to give you a hint as to what kind of the theme is going to be for you for the next 20 years in this particular area. So, watch for that. I know for me, it's going from my fourth house, which is about home and family. And it's going to the fifth house, which is about children, art, hobbies, romance, that kind of thing. So I'm curious to see what will happen for me during this time. I know for the last 14 years or so, 14, 15 years, my housing situation has changed. I moved to another home. I'm in another relationship now. So definitely my home and family entirely changed during this period. And there were changes in my own family of origin as well. One of my brothers unfortunately passed away in 2009. And, there's just been some changing dynamics in my family as well. So it did change a lot of things, and it wasn't overnight. These were all slow changes. So it's not like things are going to, definitely suddenly happen. It's more about the slow changes over time. So watch what's happening. That is a very important period for this year. The next big headline that we have is that Saturn is going into the sign of Pisces. So Saturn spends about 2.5 to 3 years in a sign. So it's still a big change. And Saturn's going from Aquarius into Pisces. And he's going in on March 7th. And he's going to be there until about February of 2026. So a big change. So Saturn is rules, structures, boundaries. He is he's all about what limits us, but he also provides structure so that we can support things. So, in some ways, Saturn's challenging because he sometimes says, no, you can't do that, or places limitations on you. But he also provides the structure for you to be able to build something of lasting value. And the thing is, when Saturn goes through whatever sign, whatever house that particular sign rules, he's asking you to put work into that area. And he says, if you put work in, you're going to be rewarded. If you don't put work in and you're lazy, then you're going to be restricted. It's not going to be great for you. So he rewards you according to the work that you do. So Saturn's been in Aquarius for the past 2.5 years. And that was a time where, Aquarius tends to rule community, friendships, large groups of people, society. We've had a lot of restrictions, right? We've had a lot of restrictions, imposed on us, because of, health issues. It was sort of like, these are the rules and restrictions for the greater good, because in Aquarius, we have to think of the collective and not the individual. And before that, he was in Capricorn, where we had rules and restrictions. This was beginning of sort of the COVID lockdowns and things imposed by government. So, and then in Aquarius, it's been like, well, what is the best for all of us? What is the best for the community? So talk about those kind of things. We've also seen, changes in, talking about things like government. Should there be restrictions on government, that kind of thing, restrictions on the internet? Should there be restrictions on social media? What are the rules around these things? So really talking about those issues. And Saturn rules both Aquarius and Capricorn. So he tends to be more serious and more restrictive when he's in those signs. So the past, 5 to 6 years have been more serious. When he goes into Pisces, it's a little less so. It tends to lighten up a bit, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take Saturn seriously. So the last time, just to give you some clues to those that are old enough to remember, Saturn was in Pisces from May 1993 to April of 1996. So think back to that time period. And Saturn, again, is about rules and restrictions. And Pisces is not about rules and restrictions. Pisces is very much about go with the flow. It is about, it is about the collective in the spiritual sense. It is about opening up to the spiritual side, opening up to, it's about psychology. It's about the subconscious. It's about spirituality and art and creativity, which, aren't always, something we think about when we think of Saturn and we think of like restrictions and rules and things like that. So Saturn is asking us like how we can build something of significance when it comes to creativity and spirituality. And if you think back to that time, that was very much like sort of like the early to mid 90s is very much about like grunge and alternative music, and we saw a lot of new music and things come out. So people are hoping that with Saturn going into Pisces over the next 3 years, we're going to see a lot of interesting art, new art forms come out, interesting like books and movies, and just really, really great for art, really great for creativity, not so great for like building structures of anything serious, or anything it's going to be hard to impose, rules and restrictions on people in general, because people are very like, well, it's about the collective and go with the flow. The other thing too is that when Saturn is in Pisces, there's often a lot of developments around drugs, not just pharmaceutical drugs, but also we had things like that was the start of the movement to legalize marijuana. The one in the 60s, we saw developments with things like LSD and stuff. So there may be a lot of talk around things like using psychotropic drugs, things like that. There may be some movement in that area, or you may see that more in the news. People may be starting to try to legalize those things, whatever you think of that, good or bad. But that's something that tends to come up during Saturn in Pisces as well. So again, look, if you know your birth chart, look at your Pisces house, because that's where you're being asked to put some work in. That's where you're being asked to, put some structures in to help you build something. But it's your Pisces house, so you're going to want to be creative and kind of go with the flow at the same time too. So a little less serious than what Saturn's been over the past, 5 to 6 years. We also have Jupiter changing signs as well. Now, Jupiter changes signs about once a year. So Jupiter is in Aries right now. He is in Aries. He started December 20th, and he's going to be there till May 16th. Jupiter is about luck and expansion. So he's going to be, putting a lot of blessings and good luck and expansion into your Aries house in your chart. In general, it is about an individuality, asserting ourselves, going for it, taking action. You'll see like there's a lot of enthusiasm towards things over the first, until about May. There's this energy like, yeah, we got to go for it. And not always thinking things through, sometimes jumping into things, but it's about taking the lead and taking action. Now, Jupiter is going to move into Taurus on May 16th, and he'll be there till next May in 2024. So Jupiter in Taurus tends to slow down. We're not rushing into things so much. Jupiter in Taurus as well, like one thing to note is that Uranus is in the sign of Taurus right now. So Jupiter is going to be joining him. And so he's asking us to expand by taking some chances, doing things a bit differently. But because he's in Taurus, it's not about jumping into things overnight. It's about trying new things. It's about adapting to new technology. Jupiter in Taurus tends to bring us like good food. It tends to bring us things like developments in food, in particular because Uranus is there as well. You might see new technology that comes in with food, or new foods invented or becoming popular. Those are going to be an upsurge in sort of like good food coming on. Also, there may be a boon with environmental type technologies as well, where we're like, okay, like how do we make technologies that will help the planet? How do we make technologies that will help to feed people, like with agriculture, those kind of things. So using like really practical sort of ideas around technology and how they can actually be used to help people, in particular with the environment and food that we're going to see over the next year. So, watch for that. Next, we have I'm going to talk about some of the retrogrades. So those are some of the big things going on. We're currently, as I'm filming this, in a Mars retrograde. That is going to end on January 12th. And Mars is going to finally move out of Gemini on March 15th. So we still have a lot of the themes of the past Mars retrograde going forward. Now, Mars, when he's in retrograde, tends to frustrate people. You want to move forward, but you can't. Well, you know what, as we get into January and we move out of the retrograde shadow, as we move through the first 3 months of the year, that's going to start to lessen. The energy is going to start to pick up. There's going to be a lot more communication because Mars is in Gemini, which is a sign about communication. There still might be some angry words with people, because Mars retrograde in Gemini tends to be like gossip, angry words, cutting words. There may be some of that, but it will lessen as we go forward. We do have a Venus retrograde this year. It is from July 22nd to September 3rd. Venus retrogrades are not as, disruptive as Mars or Mercury retrogrades. Venus retrogrades tend to be a time where people maybe we haven't gotten in touch with can come back to us. And this is not necessarily love relationships, although it can be. But it's more about like friendships and things too that can come back to us. People maybe we haven't talked to in a while that come back because it's retrograde, right? Like it's coming back to us. And Venus is about romance, but it's also about friendships, particularly female friendships. It's also about beauty and art as well. So we may see during that period like be very fashionable to be very retro, like some kind of retro style coming back. I always say too, during a Venus retrograde, don't change, don't cut your hair, don't change your style, don't like do something drastic when it comes to like renovating your house or doing something aesthetic, because once the retrograde is over, you probably won't like it anymore. If you have an idea, hold on to it till after the retrograde if you have an idea for changing your look or aesthetics around you during that time. We also, of course, have Mercury retrogrades. We have Mercury retrogrades. They happen 3 times every year, 3 to 4 times, nothing to freak out about. This year, they're all in Earth signs. So we're currently in a Mercury retrograde right now as I'm filming this. It's from December 29th, 2022 to January 18th, 2023. It's in the sign of Capricorn. Then we have from April 21st to May 14th, Mercury retrograde in the sign of Taurus. From August 23rd to September 15th in the sign of Virgo. And then we end the year on December 12th to January 1st with one in Capricorn that does slide back into Sagittarius. So they're in Earth signs. So what this means is that the Mercury retrogrades, as always with the Mercury retrograde, build in extra time for travel, expect travel disruptions and delays. It's okay. Also, miscommunications can become an issue. Ask for clarity, try to be clear yourself, but great time to edit and review things and redo things that maybe, weren't done so well before or need a reassessment, need to be redone, pardon me. So they're in Earth signs, meaning this is going to be very practical. So it's probably going to affect travel more. It's probably going to be more about like physical breakdowns of things. Also, communication about practical type things. So just a heads up for that this year. And then we have our eclipses. There are 2 sets of eclipses every year. They were on the Taurus-Scorpio axis, I should say, because eclipses always occur in opposite signs on the zodiac wheel. They're going to be shifting from the Taurus-Scorpio axis to the Aries-Libra axis. So Taurus and Scorpio, Taurus tends to be about like the physical and finances. Again, look at your chart to know how it specifically affects you. And Scorpio tends to be more about like the collective and also, sex and death and also debts as well. And it's going to be moving from that axis to the Aries Libra axis, which is more about the personal and our relationships. So how do we balance our personal needs and our needs for individuality with relationships as well and partnership? So we have a solar eclipse on April 19th in Aries. So solar eclipses tend to be beginnings and endings. So this may be a beginning and ending, in your personal life, beginning and ending of some kind, or something where you're changing up your look, your identity, something to do with the way that you present yourself. Then we have a lunar eclipse on May 5th in the sign of Scorpio, because remember, we're between the two axes. And so lunar eclipses tend to reveal things. And so we may see a revealing of information, particularly when it comes to things like sexuality, to debts, to anything that has to do with like the psychological. We may have some revelations during this time. The next set of eclipses, we have a solar eclipse on October 14th in the sign of Libra. So this could be a new beginning with relationships of some kind, partnerships, not necessarily romantic, could be business partnership. And then we have a lunar eclipse on October 28th in the sign of Taurus. So again, lunar eclipses tend to reveal things, and so it may reveal things about values, finances, money. So those are the major shifts that we're seeing for 2023. It's a big year. I hope it brings you good, wonderful things. Again, if you're interested in more detailed astrology, you can sign up for my newsletter, my free newsletter on my website. You can go to my website, link below, sign up for the newsletter to get the monthly headlines. And if you want even more detailed astrology, you can go to my Patreon, and I have a weekly astrology report where I tell you everything that's going on for the week, so you can check that out as well. And I do have astrology readings on my Etsy too. But I wanted to give you all the headlines, let you know what was going on. I hope this is helpful for you. You guys are the best. Thank you for all of your support during 2022. Thank you for comments and watching and just everything. You guys are the best. And as always, peace and love.